Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Edwin Arroyave with me. Edwin is the CEO of Skyline Security Management. He's a TV personality, and one of the things that I love most about his story is if you're willing to confront conflict and unfortunate opportunities, there can be good things on the other side of it. So, Edwin, thanks so much for being on today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Phil. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So to start your journey, you were born in Colombia, but as a 6-year-old, you moved to the United States. So talk a little about that, young season of life, leaving, what you had known and coming to an unknown area. And then also talk a little about, parents' home and some of the things that ensue not too long after coming to the States.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so my parents and sister, we came to the United States when I was 6 years old in search of that American dream,
Yeah.
which unfortunately became an American nightmare because 2 weeks after coming to the U.S., our home got raided by law enforcement, and that day both of my parents went to jail. My sister and I ended up at a foster home, and then about 8 months later, my parents got acquitted of all charges. And my sister and I thought everything was going to go back to normal. But every year after that, our home would get raided by law enforcement at least once a year. And then finally, my dad would go back to Colombia and then come back 6 months later when the heat was done. And then finally, when I was 10, it got raided again. And this time they were able to, unfortunately, put him away for a while, for a long time, actually. And the cops were nice enough to allow me to talk to him before they took him. And he said, "Son, you need to become the man of the house." And my dad was my hero. He still is my hero in many ways. And I promised him that I would. And from then on, I couldn't wait to get the opportunity to start to work so that I can help my family.
Yeah.
And he did leave us some money, so we were okay for about 2, 3 years. But about 2, 3 years later, we lost everything we had. My mom, bad investments, and just people stole our money here and there. And before we knew it, we had nowhere to go. So we ended up moving to a city called Huntington Park, and we got a three-bedroom apartment at first, and we thought we were going to be okay. But then we realized 6 months later, after we got the apartment, we couldn't afford the apartment. So then we had to rent out 2 bedrooms in the apartment, and there was probably four or five people living in each room. And then my mom, siblings, and I had now two other siblings with us now, and we basically grew up in this tiny little bedroom without any windows. And it was always dark, and it was roaches waking me up in the middle of the night, and it wasn't the nicest. But my mom did a great job of just showing me love and
Yeah.
giving me love. And more importantly, in addition to love, just always was in my ear about I was going to do something great, and always in my ear about God's with you. And because
Yeah.
God's with you, you're going to do some amazing things. And one day you're going to be able to talk about how his blessings have helped you get to where you're at. And that gave me a lot of confidence as a kid, and confidence is everything. I always talk about belief drives everything. So
Yeah.
that was sort of the beginning of my start here in the U.S.
Yeah. Now, just to, kind of jump into that idea, was that a time where you battled with, the idea of faith in God? Hey, there's so many things that are just unfortunate or, unfortunate circumstances. Like if there is something so big, why am I having to deal with this? Or was that something that you always just kind of believed in the faith and the prayers your mom put over you and said, hey, it'll be better in the future?
Yeah, I sort of just believed at an early age. I always talk about the difference between faith and fear. Faith to me, well, first of all, I'm a follower of Christ, but it also another way to look at it is faith is the projection of the most positive thing for the future,
Mm.
whereas fear is the projection of the worst possible thing for the future. But if you look at it, they both haven't happened yet.
Yeah.
So whether you like it or not, you're faith-based. It's are you going to choose to be positive or are you going to choose to be negative? And I think one of my blessings and superpowers is I've always just been very, very positive. I've always looked at the positive side of everything, and I've always been able to take a negative and turn it into a positive. So, when my mom would tell me this, I began to think that God was with me, and it allowed me to take on things that really demanded more than I thought I was worth.
Mm.
And, I always had these huge dreams. And the thing is, when you have huge dreams, you're gonna have huge problems,
Yeah.
right? It's you're gonna have God size if you're gonna have God-sized dreams, you're gonna have God-sized challenges.
Yeah.
And for me, it's in those moments where self-sufficiency is no longer an option, and that's when
Mm.
you want to believe in something higher than you to give you that confidence to again take on things that demand more than you think you're worth. So I look at it like if you have these huge dreams, you're going to realize you can't do it by yourself. And that's going to
Right.
make you tap into faith, right? But when you tap into faith, that's going to make you step into the uncertainty. But if your dreams are big enough, why would you want to tap into faith? And that's why I say, if you're always playing it safe, you're squeezing God out of the formula. If
Mm.
you only do the things that you know you're going to succeed at or that then there is no need for God. And it's
Right.
why, for me, I've always embraced uncertainty because it's in uncertainty where I know I'm going to grow. It's in uncertainty where He's always met me. And it's in uncertainty where we've always accomplished some great things together. And that's why, to me, He's the number one partner you could ever have in life, in business. And it's what's given me the confidence. But I've always also been a big dreamer. At 12 years old, I would just visualize and I would not stop thinking about how one day I was going to make $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
And I gave myself a deadline to do it by the age of 21 years old. I didn't worry about the how because I think the how is the killer of all dreams. I just knew that some way, somehow, I would make it happen. And that's
Yeah.
all I focused on. I didn't focus on the how. I was just like, I'm going to make 100 grand a year. And I would not stop thinking about that number. And now that I've done some research and sort of reversed engineered my life, I realized that I was getting a dopamine release from that.
Mm.
And it got my subconscious addicted to figuring out how to figure it out, to how to
Yeah.
make 100 grand. And that's why, and the deadline was important because that created an urgency in me. So when I got my job at 15 years old working at a call center, which by the way was the last job I ever wanted to have because I was very shy and I was very timid,
Yeah.
but it was the only company that hired me. So when I got the job, I'm like, I got to figure this out. And I remember I said, well, if I'm going to make 100 grand by the age of 21, I guess I better become the manager by 18. I guess I better become the supervisor by 16. And it was just common sense stuff. But
Yeah.
that deadline created an urgency in me
Yes.
to go make it happen. And urgency is so important. It's like, you know, here's a perfect analogy of it. When you have an early flight, like anytime I have to fly out at 6 a.m., I don't sleep that well because
Yep.
throughout the night I'm waking up and because I don't want to miss that flight.
That's
And
right.
it's my subconscious mind creating that urgency because we have a deadline to wake up at 6, right? So whether you
Yeah.
like it or not, it's there. So when you give yourself a deadline to hit one of your goals, it creates that urgency. And it created an urgency in me at a very young age of like, man, I'm going to do what most people aren't willing to do so I could become the supervisor at 16 years old. And I remember because I didn't have a lot of talent, I didn't see well, I didn't have a lot of talent. I was shy. I was timid. Everybody spoke better than I did. Most people were going to that were working at the call center were already in college.
Yeah.
They already had seniority over me, and I didn't focus on any of that negative stuff. That's the stuff that we talked earlier. I said that's the stuff you leave up to faith, and you just focus on what you can control.
Yep.
And I remember the two things that I can control at that time was my activity and my attitude, my mind, my thought. Your thought is attitude.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, okay, I'm going to, I took on a mindset of an overachiever and I
Mm.
just got obsessed with doing all the boring stuff
Yeah.
that no one else wanted to do. I became obsessed with repetition. I mean, I got a script and I must have read that thing thousands of times. And I went to the top guy of the company at the time and I said, hey, can you record your pitch? And I had a Radio Shack recorder. Remember, I went to Radio Shack. This will date how old I am, but
Yeah.
and I bought it and I took it to the main guy. I said, could you record it? And then I literally just wrote it verbatim, wrote it word for word.
Yep.
I didn't skip out on any part of that. I wrote it word for word. I I memorized it, internalized it, and then I personalized it.
Yeah.
But at first, it was all word for word. Like not when I'd flunk myself. If I missed one word, I would flunk myself, start again.
Amazing.
And then I got confidence from that. And then I started, I started doing all the boring stuff that nobody else wanted to do. I started going to the leadership development classes. We would before we'd start selling, they'd call it drilling, and this is where you sort of go back and forth. You say your presentation to someone, they say the presentation back to you,
Yeah.
and we're supposed to get there 30 minutes earlier to do that. Well, the people that were way more talented than I was never showed up to that. I
Mm.
showed up to all of them. You know, I showed up on Saturdays. The people that had all the talent that were the top people never showed up on Saturdays.
Yeah.
And I think it just helped me develop the muscle of showing up.
Yep.
And eventually, I just outworked them and my belief level started to grow. And then I started to sound like the guy that was the top producer. I started to sound like him. I started to walk like him. I basically copied everything he had. And even the way he would talk to people on the phones, and he had a beeper at the time, and he'd play with his beeper and so I started doing the same thing. And before I knew it, I became the top guy in the company. And then before
Yeah.
I knew it, I became the manager, the youngest manager in company history. So that gave me great confidence. And, it started to build my identity.
Excellent.
And identity, I think, is everything. And the way you build your identity is, I've always said, is you put yourself in a circumstance that demands more than you think you're worth.
Mm.
And then when you succeed at it, then what happens is your self-worth will increase. So that's a perfect example of me being 15 years old. I stepped into something that demanded more than I thought I was worth because I didn't really think I could be a manager, right? But then you'll never know until you try it. And I actually tried it. And then when I actually made it, my belief level went through the roof because I was like, I don't see no other 18-year-old managing 40 people the way I was managing. I was managing people that were going to college. I was
Yeah.
still in high school. And again, I started to believe maybe I am worth 100 grand a year. And then sure enough, 3 years later, I was able to open up the security company and that first year I made 150 grand. So, and then that untapped a new level of belief. Because again, belief is everything. So we all have this unlimited potential, but it is limited to where you're at today.
Yeah.
So at 15 years old, sure, I dreamed of the life I have today, but I didn't believe it.
Yeah.
But every target I would hit, so when I became the supervisor at 16, it untapped a new level of belief. Then I became
Yeah.
the manager at 18. That untapped a little bit a level of belief. Then I opened up Skyline Security at 21 years old, and I had that, first year where we did very well.
Yeah.
That now untapped a new level of belief.
Yes.
I started getting new mentors, and I started to apply what they were teaching me. And then that gave me a new level of belief because I was like, well, these guys are worth tens of millions of dollars and I'm applying what they're applying. I should be worth tens of millions of dollars. And again, it's belief drives everything.
I love that. And, to that point, one thing that I've always believed, people ask a question like, how do you gain confidence? I've always just believed it's, keeping promises you made to yourself, right? When you say, hey, I want to be the top salesperson. All right, well, what would a top salesperson do? They would learn the language of the other top salesperson. All right, I'm going to practice that. I'm going to master it. Well, Edwin becomes more confident because he did all the things necessary to be good at it. Now,
Correct.
in addition to that, you had the income goal, but you had also given yourself a couple of tangible things. One was a Mitsubishi Eclipse, and the second
Yeah.
was a home for your mom. And you had said, "Hey, these are things that I want to get to." And they gave you specific, numbers and targets. So talk a little bit about the driving force behind that, and then just that excitement on pursuit of those two goals.
Yeah, the eclipse was an interesting story, and that's probably one of my dearest stories. I probably should talk about it more because it's the first time that I started to think different.
Yeah.
Before I was always, which unfortunately it's the way 99% of people think,
Yeah.
is that most people are waiting to have to take action to then become whatever they want. And that used to be me. So if you want to use a home, because that's most people's big dream, right? Most people are waiting to have
Yeah.
$100,000 saved so they could finally take action, go to a open house so they can finally become a homeowner.
Yeah.
Or some people are waiting to go to college so they could finally have, you know, uh, uh, their college degree so they could finally take action, so they could finally become whatever it is they want to become. So they could finally go get a job and become whatever it is they want to become. The problem with that mentality is that it's related to having a low self-worth, and it's related to having a bad relationship with money. See, if you're
Yeah.
always waiting if you're always worried about saving enough money, if you're always worried about not having enough money, then what happens is you begin to hoard all of your money.
Yeah.
And when you start to hoard all of your money, you don't go touch the dream.
Mm.
And if you don't go touch the dream, you're never going to know it exists, and you're never going to want to improve on something that you're not aware of. So what'll happen is you'll just start to become complacent, and you'll start to become complacent, hoping that one day you'll have enough money so you could finally take action, so you can finally become what it is that you want to become. And I call that a scarcity
Yeah.
mindset. And when you think like that, unfortunately, what's going to happen is you're going to save some money, but life's going to punch you in the face.
Yeah.
And when it punches you in the face, you're going to lose all your money, if not all of your money. And then you're back to square one, which is just trying to save enough money so you could finally take action and become whatever you want to become. And I learned that from experience because that Mitsubishi Eclipse, I kept trying to save money so I could finally buy it, right? And man, every time I had just enough saved, some stuff would happen, some shit would happen, and I would lose it all, right?
Yeah.
And then so finally, when reality hit was I got, and a lot of people don't know this story, I got jacked at gunpoint where I lived at the apartments, and I had just given up on my dream, which was that eclipse. I
Yeah.
said, you know what, that eclipse is not for me. I'm just gonna buy myself some rims. I'm gonna upgrade my 240 SX, and I bought myself some 17-inch rims, which probably costs more than the actual car. There's
Yeah.
$3,000 rims. They had barely come out. So I spent 3,000 bucks on my rims, and I just spent like another 3 grand on my stereo for the car. Back then, I don't know if it's still a thing, but you used to have the stereo booming in your
Oh
car
yeah. Oh
and all
yeah.
that stuff. So I remember coming home and I was booming my car and I had my new rims. I thought it was so cool. And then I park and there's a gun in my head and they're like, give me your freaking car. And of course, they jacked me for the whole thing. And then 3 days later, I ended up getting laid off. Well, 3 days later, we found the car and it was on blocks and stripped.
Yeah.
And then that same week, I ended up getting laid off from the call center that I
Yeah.
worked at. And I remember driving back home and I was just so discouraged. And I remember thinking to myself, I was mad at my parents because I'm like, I've been taking care of them since then. And I was just thinking to myself, man, that Mitsubishi is never going to be a thing. So I
Mm.
passed by the dealership and I said,
Yeah.
man, it's never going to happen. And then a little voice, inner voice, just said to me, why are you so afraid? Everything you've always done, you figured out a way to get to the top.
Yeah.
And just go get your Mitsubishi, your Eclipse right now. You'll figure out a way to get another job. And when you
Yeah.
do, you're going to be the number one guy there too. And and I almost justified it. I said, well, because unemployment was going to pay me like 400 bucks every 2 weeks or whatever it was. And I said to myself, no, this will push me to go get a job. I'm
Yeah.
just going to go out. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to get the car. And I will go into the Eclipse dealership, and I came out of there with a $30,000 car and no job. At the time, I thought I was a risk taker, but now that I look back at it, there was an actual science of what just happened there, which
Yeah.
was the formula is really upside down. The
Mm.
formula is really first you be, right? Then you take action, and then you have whatever it is that you want.
Yeah.
So at that moment, what happened to me is I'd finally become, right? And
Yeah.
so what is that? So number one is becoming is I had this huge dream. I call it hope. Hope is your
Yeah.
purpose.
Love
Hope
that.
is something that you're looking forward to.
Yeah.
And your purpose, or it could be your big dream that God placed right in you, right? To become, you also have to have faith. Faith
Mhm.
is, again, I'm a follower of Christ, but it's also positive mental attitude, right?
Yeah.
And then part of becoming is believing in yourself,
Yeah.
right? Believing something in your heart before you actually have it, right? Well, the only way you could believe something in your heart is by experiencing it. The
Mm.
only way you'll ever experience it is by stepping into the uncertainty of something that demands more than you think you're worth.
Love that.
And then when you do, it builds your belief level. So at that point, even though I didn't have the money, I knew I was worth 100 grand. And
Yeah.
because I knew I was worth 100 grand, I didn't have to wait till I had the money.
Mm.
I could go in the dealership, get the car, because I had a history, to your point, Phil, of keeping the promises that you made to yourself
Yeah.
that I just knew, right? So what happens is when you become, now you can take action before you have what you need, which is
Yep.
really faith, right?
Yep.
Faith is taking action before you have what you need, right? And what
Yep.
happens is when you take action before you have what you need, you start to realize, number one, that you're a money making machine and the money's on its way anyways. So you might as well take action because you already know the money's coming.
Yeah.
More importantly, it now sends a signal to God that you do have faith and it
Mm.
causes him to act.
Yeah.
See, everything is reciprocal. If you
Yep.
want faith to act on your side, you have to take the first step. It's not
Yeah.
just about praying.
Right.
You have to take the first step. And now it causes him to act, and he'll start putting the opportunities, the people in front of you to make the impossible happen. The other thing that happens when you take action before you have what you need is you get a blueprint of what you need to make it happen. And then you just got to reverse engineer it.
Yeah.
And the more you can break it down to the ridiculous, the more obtainable it becomes. And the more attainable it becomes, the more realistic it becomes, the more you're going to want to get off your butt to go make it happen. Because what causes you to take action is your ability to think you can get a result.
Mm.
Again, what causes
Yeah.
you to take action is your ability to think you can get a result. So, to the degree that you think you can get a result, will be to the degree that you actually take action.
Love that.
And the last part of that formula is have. Have, as we spoke earlier, is the date on when you're going to do it by.
Yes.
And then that creates the urgency to go make it happen. And
Yep.
then you just got to go after it like your life depends on it. But here's the hardest part about this formula, Phil, is that for whatever reason, especially when you're trying to change your life, right before that blessing is going to come, you're going to get knocked down harder than you've ever been knocked down in your life. And it's at that point that you're going to have to make a decision. Are you going to spring back up and push forward and focus on the things that you can control and these things that are causing you to maybe want you to quit? You don't pay attention to those, and you're just going to have faith that God will put the right people in place to make the impossible happen. Or do you go back to the person you used to be and say, man, I guess this just isn't for me? The, you know, every time I'm going to do something great, something bad happens to me. This isn't meant for me. I guess I'm meant for poverty.
Yeah.
That's where most people lose is they quit at that point instead of just, again, focusing on what they can control and just continuing to push towards that deadline. I mean, I could sit here for hours and give you stories on times where I just pushed towards that deadline, even though it looked impossible.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I know the right people are going to show up. I don't know how it's going to happen, but the right people are going to show up. Every time, Phil, the right people have shown up and it's created miracles. And if you quit, you're never going to know the miracle that God had in store for you. Too many people
Good.
quit right before the blessing comes. And
Yeah.
that's why out of perseverance comes wisdom, right? If you don't persevere, you never know what's on the other side, right? But if you persevere enough, you have this wisdom, and then it just gets stronger and stronger as life gets tougher and tougher. Where when things get brought to you that are very tough, you already been there. You've already walked through that dark valley, and you already know, man, if I just keep pushing, this is a temporary discomfort. Eventually, the blessing is coming.
Yes.
And the bigger the dream, the bigger the resistance, right? So
Yep.
it's just the way it works. And That's why you want to build. You don't want things to be easy because if things are too easy, you'll never build the muscles that you'll need when life gets harder, when life throws you bigger punches. And, people always ask me, when does it get easier? It doesn't get easier. It gets harder. You just make it look easy because you get better.
Yeah.
The only way that happens is because you keep pushing through. So that formula is the formula that I've used for to get everything I got. And anyways, back to the Mitsubishi story, that's what started that formula,
Yeah.
right? So again, just to kind of recap it, most people, 99% of people are waiting to have to take action to then become. But
Yep.
in reality, that's a scarcity mindset.
Yep.
The abundance mindset is you want to have to, I'm sorry, you want to become first. Then you take action, then you have whatever it is that you want to have.
I love that. Now, for you, as you leave a job, start a business, there's some uncertainty with that.
Yeah.
However, you're growing the business and things are going extremely well. And then, as you talked about earlier, sometimes adversity hits. And in 2016, you said, I probably had started to out earn what I believed I was capable of.
Mhm.
And then self-sabotage set in. And I think there's probably a lot of people listening that can say, at some point in my life, I have probably self-sabotaged where I was at or where I was going. So talk a little about the growth of the business and then getting to that spot where you almost felt like, hey, you had out-earned what you really believed you were capable of at that moment in time.
Correct, Phil. You're never going to out earn your self worth. And again, that's another one that I had experience for myself. And when I first started the company at 21 years old, the mistake that I did was that I stopped studying. So
Mm,
what was great that the call center did for me was that before we would get on the phones, like I said earlier, they'd give us these leadership development courses,
yeah.
and we would train on mindset. We would train on a little bit of everything. So we would train on personal development stuff. And that gave me a lot of confidence. But at 21 years old, I went cold turkey and I never picked up a book again, never picked up a podcast, never did anything.
Yeah.
I just worked. And I did well for, 20 some years until, well, not 20 years, 17 years until that moment came where I finally outgrew my self-worth. And then what happened when I did that was that all these self-limiting beliefs that I had about myself started to resurface.
Yeah.
One of them being, I'm not that smart. The
Mm,
reason I didn't think I was that smart is because the school system made me believe that I wasn't that smart because I graduated with a 1.8 GPA from high
yeah.
school. So I was never a good student. I had a hard time reading. Studying was just not my thing. And these voices, again, these inner voices, right, that start to attack you. I remember hearing, oh, people are going to find out you're not smart. You've just been at the right place at the right time. Now you're
Mm,
hiring people that are way smarter than you. And the minute they find out you're not that smart, they're not going to want to work for you. So what did I do? I spent that entire year like messing around the entire year. Like I didn't want to lead because I was afraid because I was hiring people that were way smarter than me. And sure enough, I started to self-sabotage my life. I started my personal life. I started to self-sabotage the business. And before I knew it, I was on a downward spiral. But I knew what the problem was. Like we all know what the problem is deep down. We know what we're doing that we're not supposed to be doing, or we know what we should be doing. We
yeah.
just choose not to do it. And I just knew in my heart that I needed to go back to studying on my mind like I used to from 15 to 21 years old. And I remember I picked up a book for the first time in 20 something years. It was a book by Grant Cardone called 10X. And I remember at first I couldn't really read it. So then I bought the audio and then I couldn't really retain the info either on the audio. So I went back to what I did with the top sales guy, where I would just hit record, I'd stop, and then I would write it down. And I probably wrote 75% of that book out, and that's how I retained the info. But as I retained the info, what I noticed was that everything that Grant was talking about, I had already done. I just
Yeah.
didn't know how to articulate it. So then what that did for me, it got my belief level back to a high frequency. And then I started studying Ed Milet, who's also become a great mentor of mine. And everything he was talking about, I had also experienced. And remember how I said you don't believe something in your heart until you actually experience it?
Yep.
So knowing that they were worth hundreds of millions of dollars and knowing that I was actually doing the same thing they had done, I just didn't know how to articulate it,
Yeah.
made me think or made me believe that I was worth $100 million a year.
Yeah.
And what happens is when you can get your subconscious mind to finally align with what you're saying consciously, then you'll start bringing in all the people that you need to bring. You become a magnet. All the people that you need in your life start coming in your life to make that dream happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
But that doesn't happen if you're, again, saying something on the conscious, right? So at that moment, I remember I was like, "Oh, we're going to be $100 million company." The problem is I didn't believe it, and it wasn't until my subconscious mind started to believe it, and that's why association is key, right? Because two ways to build your identity. One is putting yourself in a circumstance that demands more than you think you're worth, and then succeeding at it. The second one is association, right? When you start
Mm,
to study people that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars and you start to take their experience and actually apply it, you will manifest who they are.
mm.
And that's what association is so key. So that's what it did for me. And once my subconscious mind believed it, it attracted it. You know, your subconscious mind will always prove itself correct. So that's the part we got to work on is the subconscious mind. And that comes from, again, keeping the promises you make to yourself because the problem is with integrity, people think, oh, no one's going to know that I didn't keep that promise because this is just me. The problem is yeah, the subconscious mind is actually taking tabs. And every time it's keeping tabs, and you say you're going to do something great, your subconscious mind doesn't believe you. It's like, yeah, right. You're saying you're going to do that, but I have, all this history of you always never coming through. So to try to protect you, I'm going to self-sabotage you. So that's when I finally realized, oh crap, this is real. And then sure enough, in 2017, 2016, 2017, when I did that, all of a sudden I was able to hire a president that helped us go to a whole different level on the security side. My wife at the time ended up booking a show called Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, which that ended up opening the doors to a bunch of sales guys that now wanted to come grow for us. Grant Cardone actually called out and said, I want you on my podcast.
Ed Milet.
And Ed Milet on the
Yeah.
podcast. And all these, I mean, again, I couldn't have scripted it any better on that. And yeah, and then that's how it all happened, right? But another perfect example. When you can get your subconscious mind to align with what your conscious mind is saying, you'll start attracting all those people. And sure enough, we became $100 million company.
I love it. Now, there's kind of two things within that. One, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about just the experience of, TV and in the world of showbiz, but two, also just your leadership within the company, right? So as the company was growing, it's hard to scale, right? It's easy to, well, not easy. It's easier to be a, one or two person. It's hard when you start scaling and have to hire, in mass quantity. So talk a little bit about maybe a couple of the bumps you hit along the way of scaling as well.
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect. Here's another example, right? Again, how do you build your identity? You put yourself in a circumstance that demands more than you think you're worth. When you succeed at it, your self-worth goes to the roof. One of my issues, one of my self-limiting beliefs was at 15 years old when I got that job working at a call center. What most people don't know is that I originally got declined.
Mm,
And prior to that, I got declined at like 16 job interviews as well. The reason was because I was so shy and I was so timid that during the interviews, I would get so nervous that I'd start stumbling my words and then
yeah.
I'd get really hot. And then before you knew it, I'd start profusely sweating. And people must have thought I was on drugs, right? Because there's like, why is this kid sweating so much, right? And a friend of mine is like, hey, I found this job. They hire anybody. Just show up and I promise you they'll hire you, right? So I show up to the call center thinking I'm going to get hired. And sure enough, as I'm doing the interview, the guy's handing me over a paper towel. And then I'm like, oh crap, he's realizing that I'm sweating. So then all of a sudden, I just start sweating, probably one of the worst sweats I've ever had. I mean, it looked like I had just ran a marathon by the time that interview was over.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't get the job. And I remember being discouraged walking back to the restroom and thinking to myself, I'm never going to be able to help my family. And I remember just at that point, I started praying to God. And I said, God, just help me get a job. I promise you that if you help me find a job, I'll work harder than anybody's ever worked in their life. And I'll always praise your name, but please help me find a job. And some people call this coincidence. I obviously don't think it was coincidence.
Yeah.
When I left that restroom, there's a gentleman outside. He says, "Hey kid, when do you start?" I said, "I don't start. You guys are full." He starts laughing. He's like, "Who told you that?" I'm like, "Well, the guy I just interviewed with." He says, "Come with me, kid." And he takes me to the HR room and he says, "I need you to hire this kid. I need him to start tomorrow at 3 p.m." That same person is the same person that helps me start the security company 6 years later. So
Yeah.
I'm a byproduct of one person giving me a shot, right? And that's why I've
Who
always
knew in the
said, like,
moment?
yeah, in life, you just need a person that's willing to give you a shot, a person that's going to show you a system, and a person that's going to believe in you, that's going to sort of show you the way. And for me, that's the person that God put in front of me to make that happen, right? So the reason I tell you that story is because then back to cameras and TV and all that, when Grant reached out, I I was putting him away for about 6 months. I just kept saying, no, I'm too busy. I'm too busy. Right. And really, I was scared to go on his show because I was afraid that he would embarrass me. I was like, man, if I start stumbling my words, I'm going to start sweating all over the place.
Yeah.
And no one's going to want to work for me because they're going to be like, hey, there goes that sweaty guy from the sales company. Right. And I just didn't want to do it. So I kept putting him off. And finally, I remembered it was just in my heart. My mom would always pray for me when I was younger. And she said, one day you're going to be on stages and you're going to have the opportunity to talk about your faith. And I was like, wow, this is an opportunity to go into Grand Show and talk about how I'm here because of my faith.
Yeah.
And I remember sleeping, I maybe slept 1 hour that night. I was so nervous, but I had studied and I mean, I had prepared for that interview. Like, never, there wasn't a question Grant could have asked me that I wasn't ready for.
Yeah.
And again, for me, I get my confidence from preparation. I get my
Yep.
confidence from God, but also a lot of preparation. I just prepared for everything. And sure enough, I went on that show and it was so good that then Ed Milet called me and was like, "Hey, do you mind coming out on my show?" And then I went from never being on a podcast before to coming out on two of the biggest podcasts out there at the time, and they're still huge now. And but it built my identity, right? So there's another example of putting
Yeah.
yourself in a circumstance that demands more than you think you're worth and succeeding. I'm like, oh shit, maybe I do belong doing some podcasts, right? Just gave me
Yeah.
confidence, right? And then obviously from there we started filming Real Housewives of Beverly Hills as well, which again, I lucky enough, I don't know how I was able to do that, but that was also very challenging for me because I'm not a camera type guy, and sometimes those lights, man, they're hot.
Yeah.
And if you get hot, you can start sweating there pretty quickly too. So luckily that never happened to me while I was filming, but it's one of those fears that I definitely have had. I'm like, can you imagine starting, that happened to me in the cameras? But anyways, luckily it never happened.
Now,
So, and by the way, it still happens once in a while,
yeah.
but it's very, it's before it used to happen all the time. Now it's like once every blue moon, I still get hot and I'll start sweating. And that's why whenever I'm on stage,
Yeah.
man, I got to prepare, like, because
Yeah.
that's where I get my confidence from. If I start stumbling, not good.
That's good. Now, something, that you've mentioned a couple of times already is you're humble and you're willing to learn from others. And so as you were growing, you ended up hiring Erwin McManus to help your leadership team and to help, grow the organization. So talk a little bit about, getting connected with Erwin and then, having that opportunity to bring him into the organization and allow other leaders to grow too.
Yeah, that goes back to association. At the time, I wanted to get closer to my faith. I wanted to work on my faith. And I'm like, well, who better to bring as a mentor than Erwin McManus? And what I loved about that, well, first, I wanted to kind of do the same thing that the call center did for me, which was that give that leadership development training. And I was like, I want to do that for the company. We're really a leadership development company that just happens to be in solar, that just happens to be in home security. And, there's only so much leadership development they can get from you. And so sometimes when you bring people from other places, it just makes it even more powerful because now they're not just hearing it from you, they're hearing it from them, but they're also hearing the same thing from them that they hear from you. So it's like, oh, maybe this is true, right?
Yeah.
And but one of the things about bringing Irwin is he taught me so many things about character, and it's really what Jesus has really taught, right? Which is, at the end of the day, when your talent when your talent goes, when your looks go, like all that stuff can go. The one thing that would never go is your character, right?
Mm,
So like I've always wanted to be unique, right? I think it's what my competitive nature, I've always wanted to have things that most people just can't have, and I've always wanted to challenge myself, and it was always and I wanted to take on hard things. And the more success I got, the more that I thought, I don't want success to master me.
mm,
I want to master success.
yeah.
And when you can't control your talent, one of the things that you can always control is your virtue.
Mm,
And if you don't want to die ordinary, one of the ways to control being extraordinary is having good character. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to bring Erwin McMahon is because he taught us, I mean, he's taught us a lot, but the character matrix and the importance of having character. And what's beautiful about character, which is again, it's what Jesus taught, it's transferable.
mm.
You can transfer it. You don't have to be 6'6" and have a 48-inch vertical. Like as much as you want to be Michael Jordan, you're not going to be Michael Jordan because
Right.
you're not 6'6" and you don't have a 48-inch vertical. It doesn't matter how much you train, right? You're not going to be Einstein because you don't have his IQ. There's just no way. Um, but everything that God taught is all transferable.
Yeah.
His character really at the end of the day that's what it is, and that's one of the main things that I loved about, and we're still growing, I still learn from him all the time, but you want to have different people in your life for different things, and what I brought him in to teach us more about life and character and becoming the best person possible. The pursuit of greatness is one of your biggest acts of service. So it's constantly, how do you continue to challenge yourself? What I realized is that I'm a dead man without a challenge. I need to be challenged.
Yeah.
I'm most alive when I'm being challenged. And I think to try to run away from challenges, to try to escape from them, to try to hide from them is not to live, it's to cease to live. And that's why for me, I've always again embraced those challenges. And if the challenge isn't financial anymore, then maybe it's how much money can you give away. If
Yeah.
the challenge is maybe getting back to your fitness, maybe it's getting closer to your faith. And for me, I wanted to challenge myself. If I want to get closer to my faith, well, if I want to get closer to my faith, let me surround myself with people that are closer to their faith. So it's usually how that works. If you want to make more money, you probably want to surround yourself with people that are making more money. And here's the thing, it's always going to make you feel uncomfortable. And
Mm,
that's why, you know, uh, it's again putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. And then when you succeed at them, your self-worth increases. Man, I remember when I first went to go buy my Mercedes at 21 years old, I was scared. I was like, man, they're going to laugh me off this dealership. And then I remember going and I drove out of there with a Mercedes and I was like, oh, shoot, maybe I do belong driving a Mercedes, right? But you never know until you walk in there. But it's always scary. The first
yep.
time I stayed at a nice hotel, I was scared. I'm like, oh, shoot, who do I give these keys to? Are they going to make fun of me or, do I belong here? The first time I went to a nice steakhouse, I was nervous. And then but I never let those things scare me or paralyze me. I was just like, yeah, I'm scared. I'm still going to show up to this nice dinner because I want to know what that feels like. And then once I realized what it was like, I was like, oh shit, I'm never going back to Sizzler. Like this is why I'm working hard, you know?
Yeah.
So you can't improve on something you're not aware of, right?
Yep.
So if you never had the best seats at a sporting event, well, why would you want to why would you want to work your butt off? But once you go there, you're like, man, I'm never sitting nosebleed again. That's for damn sure. Even if it means I got to work my butt off. So
That's so true. Well, Edwin, you and I could talk for hours and hours and hours, but I know you have things to get done. Are there any one or two, critical moments that we haven't gotten a chance to talk through that you feel like, hey, I would like to share, this part of my journey?
yeah, I mean, again, life and pain are inseparable,
Yeah.
and I think the sooner you can embrace that pain is a good thing, the better you're going to be in life. And,
Yeah.
and and the more that you can embrace that, no matter where you're at in life, there's going to be challenges that come your way. The better you're going to be in life, and it's what makes you resilient, right?
Mm,
You have to be resilient.
yeah.
If you want to sustain success for a long time, you have to develop resiliency because you're going to get punched in the face and you're going to get knocked down. Doesn't matter how much success you have, you're going to get knocked down, right? That's why life and pain are inseparable. The only way to get better at resiliency is to continue to push through the pain and not
Mm.
give up. What happens to most people, unfortunately, is when that pain comes, they run away from it. So because
Yeah.
they run away from it and they run away from it and look for something easier, and they're constantly looking for easy, right? Well, anything easy never lasts.
Nope.
Everything easy is always downhill.
Yeah.
Everything worthwhile is always uphill. Now, the opposite is if you actually, instead of running away from it, if you actually push through it, now you develop these muscles that you'll need to sustain success for a long time. And you develop what I believe are the three biggest skill sets you could ever have in life, which is grit, fortitude, and resiliency.
Mm.
And the reason I like those three is because no one could ever take them away from you.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what happens in your life, doesn't matter what happens in your industry. You can go to another industry and you'll succeed at that because you have the grit, you have the resilience, you have the fortitude, and you have the resiliency. And the way that you cultivate resiliency, number one is you got to have gratitude, right? You should always practice gratitude. When you're grateful, you're unlikely to see failure as permanent or personal because there's so many things that you're grateful for.
Yep.
Have to be disciplined, right? If you're good with the small, you'll be good with the big, right? So if you're self-disciplined, when hard times come, it doesn't even affect you because you're used to having good character, right?
Yeah.
And then the other one is you got to be humble. And no
Love
matter
that.
how big you are, you got to have humility. And the minute you think you know it all, well, you just capped yourself. You can't grow anymore because you think you know it all, right? If you're humble, you'll realize it could all be taken away very quickly. And you, you're now, no matter how much success you have, you'll always do the little things that you're supposed to be doing. And you'll always treat people with integrity. In fact, humility is probably the closest attribute to integrity.
Yeah.
Because if you're humble, you're going to care about other people, right? You're
Yeah.
not going to want to not keep your word amongst other people. So if you have those three things, then you'll develop resiliency, which will allow you to have success for a long time. Because that is life. Unfortunately, it's life and pain come together.
Now, do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, I'll give you one more. So, with all of those things and skills you've learned, lessons you've learned within your whole life, and now your children growing up in a very different environment than what you grew up in, how do you bring those lessons and life lessons to them that you've appreciated from the hard times, knowing that life is a little bit different for your kids than it was for you and how you were growing up from economic status, but also the environment they're growing up in?
Great question. So I think things are caught, not taught,
Yeah.
right? It's a lot of what they can see.
Hmm.
So I just try to give examples just by them seeing me do it, right?
Yeah.
I go visit my mom every Saturday, I have breakfast with her. Um, I want them to see that. I just don't talk about it. And I got that from my dad. My dad always told me, hey, whatever you do, you always take care of your mom. You only have one mom. She's always going to be the one. And you got to take care of her until her last days on earth. And now I'm doing the same, but now they're going to see that and they're going to want to take care of their mom, right? Um, whenever I'm having long days, I have a conversation with them. Hey, that's just not out there messing around. Like this is what I'm doing. Hey, check out this letter somebody wrote me. Look how we're changing lives here,
Yeah.
and they get to see that, right?
Yep.
Um, I'm always talking to them about character. I pray with them every night. My son always asks me, "Hey, Dad," he comes in my, he always has to, we always have to pray together before he goes to bed.
I
But he
love that.
comes and looks for me.
Yeah.
I take them to church all the time. So again, they see me doing it, and it's how I'm hoping that I could be an example to them. And so yeah, so that's kind of a big thing. And one more thing that I wanted to share with you because I was got a little sidetracked with the resiliency part, but um, one of the things that I wanted to share, because I've gone through my struggle the last 6 months as well, is even though it's been the toughest part of, and again, here I am. I had my best year in 2023. Never thought I had to worry about money again. And then all of a sudden, that's followed up by the worst year I've ever had in my life. Both businesses didn't do well in 2024. Now we're rebuilding both of those, and but also my personal life just became a crapshoot.
Yeah.
And ironically, it allowed me to have the most peace I've ever had in my life because it allowed me to be present. And what I found myself was that I was always in the future and I was not spending enough time in the present. So I'd be with my kids or I'd be somewhere in a meeting, but I was always thinking of, I got to do this, I got to do that. Oh, shoot, man, I got to do this, this, this. So yeah, I was there, but I wasn't really there. I was always in the future, right? Because it was this thing of like, oh man, what am I going to do next? What am I accomplishing next? And when my life sort of got turned upside down, I started to realize like at the end of the day, none of this matters. Like
Yeah.
family matters, and I got to be here for my kids. And I became more present. And things that I thought I couldn't do, like take them to school, I was forced to take them to school. And then I was like, wait, the business is still running and it's still doing all right. They didn't need me. I could be present and I could go to a dinner and not pick up the phone for 3 hours. And I was like, if I don't pick up the phone for 3 hours and everything goes to hell, so be it, man. I need to be more present. And ironically, just it gave me the most peace I've ever had. I just had this sense of peace. I was like, whoa, I've never had this kind of peace, which again, ironic because it's the worst time in my life, yet I'm feeling a lot of peace. And I broke it down to, yeah, it's because I've been present
Yeah.
and I've stopped thinking about the future. And the reason why is like it couldn't get any worse than it was right now. So why am I going to think of the future? Like this is as worse as it's going to get. So I might as well be present in these moments. And it's been great as far as I've learned a lot, grown so much from it. And now things are starting to look really bright and both businesses are starting to do well again. And my personal life is starting to look great again. And again, it's just one of those moments where it's a temporary discomfort. So for
Mhm.
anyone who's going through a very, very tough time, just know it's all temporary.
Yep.
And if you stop what you're doing and you let that fear paralyze you, that's when it gets worse,
Yep.
right? Because when you do nothing, not only do you not get nothing, you get worse. When you're continuing to push forward and you're continuing to take action towards the things that you can control, there's always going to be a reaction. For every action, there's a reaction.
Yeah.
For every cause, there's an effect. And you just got to keep pushing forward, pushing through that dark valley. And eventually it starts to get good again.
Yep.
And so hopefully that gives some people some hope that, and again, that's the reason I'm able to do that is because I've done it so many times in my
Yeah.
life, right?
Yep.
So that's why from perseverance comes wisdom.
Yes.
But if you quit, you'll never know the wisdom,
Yep.
right? And that's what happens to most people is they don't they just quit. They let that fear paralyze them, so they never know what's on the other side of that. And on the other side of fear is your freedom. On the other side of your greatness, on the other side of your pain is your greatness, and on the other side of your failure is your future. It's how you respond to your failure that's going to determine your future. So again, I think it's uh, it's one of those when you're going through it. If you can go back to, I call them anchor moments
Yeah.
of when you've accomplished some great things and get kind of confidence from that, you'll have confidence through those tough times, right? And that's exactly, I'm like, okay, I've been through this. Yes, it's the toughest thing I've ever gone through, but I've had some other tough things happen in my life before, and this has been the formula.
Yep.
It's just continue to push, focus on what you can control. Obviously, gratitude is huge to help you get through those moments, right? If you're struggling with your faith, increase your gratitude.
Yeah.
When you increase your gratitude, you'd be surprised how that faith all of a sudden starts to increase as well. So, gratitude is one of the most powerful things you could ever have. And turning a negative, turning it into a positive, that's another powerful thing. It allows you to live inside out versus exterior inside.
I love it. Well, Edwin, I want to say thanks again so much for sharing your journey and your story, and excited to watch you, over the next 2, 3, 4 years, and hopefully we can do this again and talk about all
I
the
would love
amazing
to.
things that have happened from that point on.
Awesome, Phil.